The house hummed with the sound of life. Glasses clinked, laughter bounced off the walls, and the low hum of conversation filled every corner of our Connecticut home. Tonight was my night. After 10 years of relentless grind, late nights, and missed anniversaries, I'd finally been promoted to Vice President of Sales. The title wasn't just a few extra words on my business card. It was validation, a badge proving I'd made it. I stood near the fireplace, surrounded by colleagues and friends, swirling a bourbon in my hand as they congratulated me. "Mike, man, this is huge!" my best friend Drew exclaimed, clapping me on the back with a grin. "Next stop, CEO, huh?" I chuckled and raised my glass. "One step at a time, Drew. Let me enjoy this one first." Across the room, my wife, Emma, was laughing at something Jason, my old college roommate, had said. She had her hand lightly on his arm, the way she often did when she wanted to emphasize something. Her emerald green dress fit her perfectly, a little too perfectly maybe, and her smile lit up the room. She was the kind of woman who could command attention without even trying, and tonight, she was every bit the perfect hostess. Yet, something about the way she looked at Jason made my stomach tighten. It wasn't anything obvious, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. But it was enough to make me take another long sip of bourbon. "You good, man?" Drew asked, leaning in a little closer. "Yeah, I'm great," I lied, forcing a smile. The party carried on, and I made my rounds, shaking hands, accepting slaps on the back, and listening to the same jokes about how I'd finally earned my corner office. But my eyes kept drifting back to Emma. She was working the room as she always did, chatting with guests, laughing at all the right moments, and making everyone feel at home. Jason was always nearby. "Mike!" someone called. I turned to see my boss, Greg, holding a glass of wine. "Speech! Come on, don't leave us hanging." The room quieted, and all eyes turned to me. I raised my glass, trying to shove aside the knot forming in my chest. "Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. It means the world to me to share this with all of you. To my team at work, I couldn't have done this without you. To my friends, thanks for keeping me sane over the years. And most of all," I turned toward Emma, who was standing near the kitchen doorway, her smile still perfect but her eyes unreadable. "To my wife, Emma, you've been my rock through it all. I love you." The room erupted into applause, but Emma's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she quickly recovered. She raised her glass in a toast, her expression glowing again, but I couldn't unsee that flicker. It was like a crack in glass, small but impossible to ignore. As the night wore on, the house began to empty out. The buzz of conversation faded into the occasional laugh or clinking glass as the last few guests lingered. Drew caught me as I was walking toward the kitchen. "You noticed it too, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. "Noticed what?" I said a little too quickly. "Emma and Jason." Drew leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "She hasn't left his side all night, and he's been staring at her like she's the only woman in the room. Jason's an old friend. That's just how he is," I said, my voice defensive. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. "Yeah, maybe." Drew's expression softened. You're my best friend, Mike. I don't want you to get blindsided by something." I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself another drink and tried to shake off the unease. By the time the last guest left, it was almost midnight. The house was quiet now, the only sound coming from the dishwasher humming softly in the background. Emma was in the living room, gathering a few stray glasses. "You should get to bed," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Big day tomorrow." "Yeah," I said, my voice distant. For a moment we just stood there. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't guilt exactly, but it wasn't joy either. "Did you have a good time?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Of course. You were the star of the night," she said, flashing that perfect smile again. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly, then put it face down. And that was the moment. A small, ordinary action, but one that sent a chill down my spine. "Who was that?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. No one, she said too quickly, her smile fading. Emma, I said, taking a step closer. Who was it? It's late, Mike. Let's not do this tonight. She turned away, but I caught her wrist gently, stopping her. Emma, I said again, my voice low. Is there something you need to tell me? She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something. Fear? Maybe? Or guilt? No, she said finally, but the word felt like a lie. And just like that, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. The morning sun poured through the blinds, painting the kitchen in slanted lines of light. The house, normally a place of comfort, felt foreign, like someone had rearranged everything while I wasn't looking. Emma stood at the counter, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She hadn't said much since last night. Big plans today? I asked, keeping my voice light. Just errands, she said, not looking up. Grocery shopping, maybe a yoga class. Yoga. The word felt heavy, weighted with 1,000 suspicions I hadn't let myself acknowledge before. I stared at her, waiting for her to meet my eyes, but she didn't. I spent the morning pacing the house, unable to focus on anything. I had planned to relax today, maybe sort through the emails I'd ignored during the promotion chaos, but every time I tried to sit down, my mind raced back to last night. Drew's words echoed in my head. Asterisk. She hasn't left his side all night. Asterisk, was it true? Had I been so blinded by my own excitement that I missed something right in front of me? The memories started coming back. Little things that seemed insignificant at the time. The girls' nights Emma had started organizing a few months ago. Nights when she'd come home late smelling of wine and perfume. The way she'd suddenly become protective of her phone, always turning the screen away or keeping it in her pocket. And Jason, he'd been around more often, hadn't he? Casual visits that always seemed a little too well-timed. By noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called Drew. You busy? I asked, trying to sound casual. For you? Never. What's up? Can you swing by? I need to talk. Drew arrived an hour later, a six-pack of beer in hand. He could tell from the look on my face that this wasn't a celebratory visit. All right, he said, cracking open a can and handing me one. Spill. It's Emma, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. And Jason. Drew nodded slowly, waiting for me to continue. I don't know, man. Something feels off. Last night, the way they were together, it didn't feel right. And now, I'm starting to think back to all these little things I didn't notice before. Or maybe I did, but I ignored them. Like what? The phone, the late nights, the yoga classes. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling ridiculous as I said it out loud. Am I crazy? Is this just me being paranoid? Drew took a long sip of his beer before answering. Look, Mike, I'm not saying she's cheating, but I've been in this kind of situation before. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. That night, I decided to put my suspicions to the test. Emma had mentioned her yoga class earlier, so when she left the house around 7 p.m., I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. The studio she went to was only 10 minutes away, but when I pulled into the parking lot, her car wasn't there. My chest tightened as I double-checked the address. Maybe she's running late. I waited, my fingers tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Still no sign of her. By the time I got home, Emma's car was already in the driveway. She was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries like nothing was out of the ordinary. How was yoga? I asked, leaning casually against the counter. It was good, she said without hesitation. You seem pretty fast. Did class end early? She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to notice, before turning to face me with a smile. No, just didn't feel like staying late to chat with everyone. Why? Just curious, I said, matching her tone. Inside, I was anything but calm. The lie was small, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, barely registering the show we were pretending to watch together. Every glance at Emma felt like a new betrayal. Every smile of hers a facade I couldn't stand to look at. Around 10 p.m., her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up quickly, her thumb swiping the screen before I could even glance at the notification. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just Molly," she said, naming one of her yoga friends. "You sure?" Emma's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" I held her gaze for a long moment before shaking my head. "Nothing. Forget it." But I couldn't forget it. Not anymore. The silence between Emma and me had grown into something solid, like a wall neither of us wanted to admit existed. That next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the bare trees in the backyard. Emma moved quietly around the kitchen, the only sound the faint clink of dishes. My phone buzzed. It was Drew. "Did you talk to her yet?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. No, I hadn't. Because what if Drew was wrong? What if I was wrong? But then I thought about the parking lot at the yoga studio. Her car hadn't been there. And her phone. Always buzzing, always hidden. Emma walked into the living room, her mug in hand, and sat on the couch. She didn't look at me. Her eyes focused on some distant point through the window. "We need to talk," I said finally. Her head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge me. "What about?" I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse quicken. "About last night. About Jason." Her shoulders stiffened, just for a second, before she turned back to the window. "What about him?" "I'm not stupid, Emma." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I saw the way you two were at the party, and I can't stop thinking about all these little things that don't add up." She was quiet for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. "You're imagining things, Mike." "Am I?" I stood, walking to the edge of the couch. "Then explain the phone. The late nights. The fact that your car wasn't at yoga last night." Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if the words had caught in her throat. "Where were you, Emma?" I pressed, my voice low now. She stood, setting her mug down on the coffee table with a sharp clink. "I can't believe you're doing this. After everything. After all the work you've been putting ahead of us. You're going to accuse me of... Don't you dare turn this around on me." I interrupted, my voice rising. "I've been working my ass off for us, Emma. For you. So don't act like this is my fault." Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might yell back. But instead, she looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "Emma," I said, softer now, "if there's something you need to tell me, just say it." The room fell silent. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then finally she spoke. "It was a mistake." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I stared at her, not fully processing what she'd just said. "What?" I managed to choke out. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look at me. "It didn't mean anything, Mike. I swear. It was stupid, and it's over. It's been over for months." The world felt like it had tilted on its axis. I sat down heavily on the edge of the coffee table, my hands gripping my knees. "You're telling me," my voice cracked, "you're telling me you and Jason." "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her voice desperate. "I wasn't thinking straight. You were so busy with work, and I felt..." She stopped, biting her lip. "I felt alone." "Alone?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "You felt alone, so you slept with Jason? My best friend." "It wasn't like that," she shouted, finally meeting my eyes. "It just happened. I didn't plan it, Mike. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I laughed bitterly, standing up and pacing the room. "Emma, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. Do you have any idea what this feels like?" I stopped pacing and turned to face her. "How long?" "What? How long were you sleeping with him?" Her lips trembled. "A few months. But it's been over." I ended it. "I swear, Mike, it's been over for months." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Months? You're telling me this wasn't just a one-time thing? You were sneaking around with him for months." "I wasn't sneaking." "Don't..." I said sharply, holding up a hand. Don't lie to me anymore. I deserve the truth. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. It started last summer. I didn't mean for it to happen, but Jason, he was there when I felt like you weren't. And it just happened. I shook my head, my chest heaving with anger and hurt. Do you love him? No, she said immediately, stepping closer to me. Mike, I love you. I've always loved you. It was just a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. At that moment, the front door opened, and Jason stepped inside. He froze when he saw us, his eyes darting between Emma and me. Jason, I said, my voice cold. Mike, he said cautiously. What's going on? I know, I said simply. Jason's face paled. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly searching for the right words. Mike, save it, I snapped, stepping toward him. I don't want to hear your excuses. You were supposed to be my friend, my brother, and you went behind my back with my wife. Jason raised his hands in a placating gesture. It wasn't like that. Don't, I said, cutting him off. Don't you dare try to justify this. Mike, I'm sorry, he said, his voice low. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just got out of hand. Got out of hand? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. That's what you're going with? Jason opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. Get out of my house, I said through gritted teeth. He hesitated, looking at Emma as if waiting for her to say something. Get out, I yelled, my voice echoing through the room. Jason flinched, then nodded and walked out the door without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to Emma, who was standing frozen in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face. What now? She whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because I didn't know. The house was suffocatingly quiet after Jason left. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel like a chore. Emma stood frozen near the couch, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, her lips trembling like she was about to speak. But she didn't. Couldn't look at her. I didn't want to see her face, didn't want to see the person I thought I knew, the person I had trusted above everyone else, reduced to a stranger. I walked to the kitchen, needing distance, but there was no escaping it. The weight of what I had just learned followed me like a shadow. Mike, Emma called softly from the living room. Her voice made my skin crawl. It wasn't fair. I knew that. I knew she wasn't a monster, and I wasn't perfect. But right now, all I could feel was the anger boiling in my chest. I gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the marble as if it could somehow answer the questions running through my mind. How? Why? Did I really miss all the signs? Or did I just choose to ignore them? Emma's footsteps were soft as she approached. Please? Can we talk? I spun around, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Talk about what, Emma? About how you betrayed me. About how you slept with him. She flinched, her arms wrapping around herself as if she could shield herself from my words. I know you're angry. Angry? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Emma, I'm not just angry. I'm devastated. I'm humiliated. You didn't just cheat on me, you did it with Jason. Jason, of all people. My friend. Our friend. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded, stepping closer. Tell me, Emma. I want to know. How did it start? Did he make the first move, or did you? Did you even think about me? About us? Or did you just not care? She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but still audible. I don't know, she choked out. I wasn't thinking straight. I was lonely, Mike. You were always at work, always stressed, always somewhere else even when you were here. So this is my fault? I snapped, my voice rising. No, she said quickly, dropping her hands and looking at me with wide, desperate eyes. It's not your fault. I'm not saying that. I'm trying to explain. Well, you're doing a terrible job, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. We stood there in silence for a while, the distance between us feeling wider than ever. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Mike. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You don't get to say that. Not now. But it's true, she insisted, stepping closer. I made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But that doesn't change how I feel about you. I love you. I've always loved you. I stared at her, searching her face for something, anything, that could make me believe her. But all I saw was a woman who had shattered my trust into a million pieces. I need to get out of here, I said abruptly, grabbing my coat from the back of a chair. Mike, wait, she said, her voice pleading. Please don't leave like this. But I couldn't stay. If I did, I might say something I couldn't take back. Or worse, I might let her convince me that everything could go back to the way it was. I slammed the door behind me and climbed into my car, the cold December air biting at my face. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape. I ended up at Drew's place. He opened the door, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me. Mike, Jesus, man, you look like hell. Can I come in? I asked. Of course. He stepped aside, letting me in. I collapsed onto his couch, burying my face in my hands. For a moment, neither of us said anything. She told me? I said finally, my voice muffled. She admitted it. Drew sat down across from me, a grim expression on his face. I'm sorry, man. I don't even know what to do, I said, looking up at him. She says she loves me, that it was a mistake. But how do I believe that? How do I move past this? Drew sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. You've got to figure out what you want, Mike. Do you want to try to fix this? Or are you done? I don't know, I said honestly. I can't even think straight right now. Then take some time, Drew said. Don't make any decisions tonight. Go home, get some sleep, and figure it out tomorrow. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at Drew's, replaying every conversation, every memory, every moment that led up to this. By the time the sun rose, I still didn't have any answers. But I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. The morning light filtered through Drew's living room curtains, catching the dust in the air as I stared at the ceiling. I hadn't slept, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Emma's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, her lips trembling as she said, asterisk. It didn't mean anything, asterisk, but it meant something to me. Coffee? Drew's voice broke through my thoughts. I sat up, rubbing my face. Yeah, thanks. He handed me a steaming mug and sat across from me, his expression careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. You still mad? He asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. I don't even know if mad covers it, I admitted, my voice raw. It's like, I'm angry, yeah, but it's deeper than that. It's like I don't even know who she is anymore. Or who I am, for that matter. Drew nodded, leaning back in his chair. I get that. When Chelsea and I had our rough patch, I felt the same way. Like the person I'd built my life with was suddenly a stranger. Yeah, but Chelsea didn't cheat on you, I snapped. No, she didn't, he admitted. But the feelings of betrayal, of questioning everything, that part's the same. I stared into my coffee, the steam curling upward in delicate swirls. I don't know if I can forgive her, Drew. And even if I can, how do I ever trust her again? By the time I left Drew's house, it was almost noon. The crisp December air stung my face as I climbed into my car. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I found myself aimlessly circling the neighborhood, passing by the familiar landmarks of our life together. The diner where Emma and I had our first date. The park where I proposed to her, kneeling in the snow with a ring that had taken me 6 months of saving to buy. The church where we said our vows, promising to love each other in sickness and health, for better or worse. This is worse, I thought bitterly, and I have no idea how to fix it. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Emma's car was there. I hesitated for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, before forcing myself to get out. The house smelled like coffee and faintly of cinnamon, a cruel reminder of how normal everything had once been. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug in her hands, her eyes puffy and bloodshot. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cautious. "Hi," she said softly. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down across from her, letting the silence stretch between us. "I didn't think you were coming back," she said finally. "I wasn't sure if I would," I admitted. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying again. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but if you'll let me, I want to explain." I didn't say anything, but I didn't stop her either. She started talking, her words spilling out in a rush. She told me about how lonely she'd felt while I was consumed with work. How Jason had been there, always quick with a joke or a listening ear. How one night, after too much wine at a barbecue, a moment of weakness turned into something more. "It wasn't love," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't even about him, really. It was about me. About feeling wanted. Feeling like someone noticed me. And I know that doesn't excuse it. It doesn't make it right. But that's the truth." I sat there, absorbing her words, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite name. "Do you know what this has done to me?" I asked finally, my voice low. "Do you have any idea what it's like to look at you and wonder if anything we had was real? To look at Jason and feel like the biggest fool in the world?" She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, Mike. I know I've destroyed everything. And if you want me to leave, I will. But I swear to you it's over. It's been over for months. And all I've wanted since then is to make things right." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Later that evening, Drew called. "Did you talk to her?" he asked. "Yeah. And I still don't know what to do," I admitted. Drew sighed. "Look, man, I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this. If there's even a part of you that thinks you can forgive her, that thinks this is worth fighting for, don't walk away just to prove a point. But if you can't forgive her, if you know you'll never trust her again, then don't drag it out. Do what's best for you." I didn't respond. Couldn't. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't know what was best for me anymore. That night, Emma and I sat in silence on the couch, the distance between us feeling like miles. I looked over at her, at the woman I had built a life with, and wondered if we could ever find our way back to each other. "I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days," I said finally. Emma's head snapped toward me, panic flashing in her eyes. "Mike, no, please don't. We can figure this out together." "I need time," I said firmly. "I need space to think." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. I packed a bag and left, the weight of everything pressing down on me as I drove away. In the quiet of the hotel room, I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over in my mind. Drew's words echoed in my head. "If there's even a part of you that thinks this is worth fighting for," was there? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever I decided, it had to be something I could live with. The hotel room was painfully sterile. Beige walls, thin sheets, and a desk lamp that flickered when I turned it on too quickly. I stared out the window at the parking lot below, my mind churning with thoughts that refused to settle. It had been 3 days since I left the house, 3 days of carefully curated distance between me and Emma. She had texted me a few times. Short, desperate messages asking if I was okay, if we could talk. I hadn't responded, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I didn't know what to say. On the 4th day, I woke up with a strange clarity, as if my subconscious had been working overtime while I slept. I couldn't keep running. Whether I stayed with Emma or walked away, I had to confront her, and myself with everything. I packed my bag, checked out of the hotel, and drove home. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when she heard the door, her eyes widening in a mix of relief and apprehension. "You're back," she said softly, standing slowly as if afraid I might turn and leave again. "For now," I replied, setting my bag down by the door. She swallowed hard, nodding. "Can we talk? That's why I'm here." We sat across from each other at the table. The same table where we'd shared countless meals, planned vacations, argued about bills, and celebrated birthdays. Now it felt like a battlefield. I've had some time to think. I began, my voice steady but cold. And I need to know the truth. All of it. No half answers, no sugarcoating. If there's any chance of moving forward, I need to know everything. Emma nodded, her hands trembling as she clasped them on the table. Okay, I'll tell you anything you want to know. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Why Jason? Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. Because he was there, she said finally, her voice breaking. Because he was easy. He made me feel seen at a time when I felt invisible. And I know how pathetic that sounds, but it's the truth. Invisible, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. You felt invisible because I was working hard to build a life for us? She shook her head quickly, tears welling in her eyes. No, Mike. I know how hard you worked, and I appreciated it. But it was like, you were always somewhere else. Even when you were home, you weren't really here. And I felt lost. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. So your solution was to have an affair? No, she said firmly, her voice trembling. It wasn't a solution. It was a mistake. A horrible, selfish mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my life. The room was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock. I need you to understand something, Emma, I said finally. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we built together. Every memory, every promise, every dream. We built a life on trust, and you tore it down. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. I know, Mike, and I hate myself for it. But I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll answer any question you have, no matter how hard it is. I'll do anything if it means we have a chance. Her words hung in the air, raw and desperate. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the idea that we could fix this, that we could somehow piece together what had been shattered. But another part of me, the part that had been replaying the betrayal over and over for days, wasn't so sure. Do you know what Jason said to me when I confronted him? I asked, my voice colder now. She shook her head, her tears streaking her cheeks. He said it just happened. Like it was some random accident, like he tripped and fell into bed with my wife. Do you feel the same way? That it just happened? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It didn't just happen. I made a choice. Terrible choice. And I'll never forgive myself for it. I stood, pacing the kitchen as I ran my hands through my hair. You think I can just forget this? Pretend it didn't happen? Every time I look at you, I'll see him. Every time we're together, I'll wonder if you're thinking about him. How the hell am I supposed to move past that? Emma stood too, her hands clasped in front of her. I don't expect you to forget, Mike. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I'm asking you, begging you, not to give up on us. I turned to face her, my chest heaving with emotion. I don't know if I can, Emma. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. We stood there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Finally, I spoke. I need more time, I said, my voice heavy. Emma nodded, her tears falling silently. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. That night, I slept in the guest room, the space between us feeling as wide as the Grand Canyon. I stared at the ceiling, the events of the past week replaying in my mind like a broken record. Drew's words echoed in my head again. Asterisk. If you think it's worth fighting for, don't walk away just to prove a point. Asterisk. Was it worth fighting for? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever decision I made, it would be mine, and it would be final.